It's so good to be back in England. I was here in February of 2012, and it's always, we receive such good hospitality when we come to England. Robert, the 40 Days for Life leader, and his wife Cara have been so generous to us. Robert brought 40 Days for Life to England first in 2010 after he went on a mission trip to Canada and visited that country and saw 40 Days for Life, was introduced to it, and had the courage to bring it to the UK, where it has since absolutely exploded. And so it's such a joy to be here. I'm married. I have 4 beautiful children, 3 girls and a boy. The girls particularly are always excited when I come to the UK. They are convinced that Robert knows the Queen and meets with her regularly. And so it's always wonderful to be here. Coming to a place where so many of you are studying, and in a place where we're supposed to be learning and finding, seeking truth. That was the place where I first got involved in the pro-life movement. When I went to university, I went to Texas A&M University, which is the 3rd largest university in America. There are 60,000 students in the town where Abby and I both live, College Station, Texas. The whole town is about 200,000 people, but 60,000 of those are university students. And that's where I first got involved in the pro-life movement. And I'll never forget, one of the first times I was ever asked to speak at an event outside of the state of Texas was in Washington State, an area that is extremely hostile to the pro-life movement. And I gave a speech, and the next day I was being driven back to the airport, and I think I was 22 years old at the time. I had just gotten out of college, and I'd gotten married. And I asked the guy driving me a very naive question that sort of woke me up to the reality of what we face in the UK and in the United States of abortion. I asked him how he got involved in the pro-life movement, and I was doing so just to make conversation, to make the time pass, on the way to the airport. And this gentleman immediately began to tear up, and I could tell that I was in for a story. And he shared with me how he had left his Catholic faith many years ago. He left the church, and he worked in a Catholic hospital, examining organs that were removed from people, appendices and livers and so forth, and he would have to examine them in the lab and then send them off, and they would arrive by FedEx. And there was a confusion one day at his lab, and he received the shipment that was supposed to go to the secular hospital. And in that shipment, he saw a Ziploc bag that had a perfectly formed 13-week-old baby boy sitting in this Ziploc plastic bag. And that was the product of a saline abortion. And the man immediately was taken back by what he was looking at. He supported abortion, but like most people, it was very passive and something at a distance that he really didn't talk about on a regular daily basis. And here he was looking at this beautiful baby boy who was dead. And what really struck him, which really speaks to us and the reality that we face today, is how that bag was labeled. Because on the bag was POC, product of conception. And when he read that, looking at this beautiful baby boy, his heart just sank. And he ended up, that was the starting point of him returning to his faith and getting very involved in the pro-life movement. And as we look at the pro-life movement at large, and certainly having the joy of having Abby here over in the United Kingdom, we see that our movement is a movement of converts. We are not self-righteous Christians standing on street corners telling the world what to do. We are following the convictions not only of science and reason, but of natural law and faith to defend the most obvious thing that needs to be defended. That gentleman was hit over the head by a 2x4, and that was sort of his leap into the pro-life movement. But for most of us, God ticks away at us throughout our life, and that was certainly the case for me. I went to a Catholic high school in East Texas, When you go to a Catholic high school in East Texas, 92% of the students are Southern Baptist. And so I was one of the few Catholics. We had wonderful, wonderful Irish priests in that school, and they gave me a great example. And so when I was at university, my then girlfriend, now wife, got me involved in the pro-life movement, and it was there that we led the first ever 40 Days for Life campaign, which was 40 days of prayer and fasting, 40 days of peaceful vigil, and 40 days of community outreach. And the peaceful vigil took place outside of our local Planned Parenthood abortion facility. Planned Parenthood in the United States is the largest abortion provider in our country. That was the Planned Parenthood where Abby also volunteered and eventually worked at for 8 years. She was actually the 2008 Planned Parenthood Employee of the Year. And so when we launched 40 Days for Life in the fall of 2007, and it since has gone to 522 cities in 21 different countries, including the explosive growth in the United Kingdom under Robert's leadership, Abby witnessed that growth, leaving her abortion facility in Texas and being spread around the world. And we've seen 88 abortion facility workers who have had a change of heart, had a conversion, and left their jobs during a 40 Days for Life campaign. Abby is actually the 26th worker that left when she left back in 2009. We've also had the joy of seeing 8,245 moms choose life at the very last moment. We actually got to meet one of the babies that was saved here in the UK. I'm jet lagged. Thursday night at the banquet, and it was so beautiful. We have over these 8,245 children that have been spared, and it's so easy when you look at the 190,000 that are aborted every year in the United Kingdom. Over 1.2 million every year in the United States. And it's so easy to get lost in those statistics and to forget that, yes, in the midst of an argument or a healthy debate or a prayer or a sermon, that these ultimately are people that we are talking about, made in the image and likeness of God. And dangerous things happen when people are simply referred to as mere statistics. And abortion certainly reminds us of that. It reminded this gentleman who was driving me to the airport that children are not statistics, and that we are not made to be products of conception. We're made to be saints. And it was a very beautiful to see 40 Days for Life spread throughout the world, because it's always a cliche to say that this is about hearts and minds, but it really is. About hearts and minds, and Abby's story, which she'll share here in a moment, really points to that, of why we go out and we peacefully pray in an abortion facility, but particularly why in an academic setting we need to discuss this issue. The first course I took when I was in college, I was a philosophy major, and it was modern day moral controversies. And the first day, the professor announced that we would discuss everything. The just worth theory, the death penalty, which we have in the United States. We would discuss everything except abortion, because it was too controversial. Now, I'm sure you've never encountered professors like this, and so this is so foreign to you. But the settings where we are supposed to be seeking truth, where we are supposed to be arguing and bickering and putting forth respectable points to come to a conclusion, abortion is not allowed in those settings. And that speaks to the reality of how personally we take this. That we have removed it from its proper place in our culture because it is so detrimental to our society we cannot even talk about it. We have to talk about it in the abstract. And that's how it survives. That's how it survived for 46 years here in the UK and for 40 years in the United States. And our two countries that have brought so much good and justice to the world, we now find ourselves in the midst of a new enemy, and that enemy is within our countries. It's our cultures and the radical personal autonomy that we have granted ourselves, to once again make people property. And so that's really the approach, the reason that during a 40 Days for Life campaign we take the approach that we do, that it's truth in love and certainly truth in action to show the compassion for the women, for the workers, and yes, for these unborn children. Abby and I never would have imagined we'd be at Oxford together, at least not on the same side, debating each other. She was the director of the Planned Parenthood in Texas, and I was the director of the local pro-life organization, the Coalition for Life. We both did media interviews against one another's points many, many times. And after Abby, for the first time, after working at Planned Parenthood for 8 years, after being their Employee of the Year, she was asked to assist with an ultrasound-guided abortion where she witnessed a 13-week-old baby boy fight for his life and lose it right before her eyes. And she had the courage to resign from her position and leave that industry, and now in the United States is one of the biggest advocates for the unborn and powerful voices. And so it's such a joy to have her, and I want to introduce her so that she can share some of her story, and then we want to be sure that we take questions and try to provide answers.
Yeah. Well, hi. It is good to be here with all of you. I remember when I worked at Planned Parenthood in 2004, I was at the clinic, and it was a day that we were doing abortions, and we had clinic escorts, so people that were volunteers with Planned Parenthood that would escort women from their car to the front door so that they wouldn't be able to talk to the people on the other side of the fence, and because they were all about choice. And so I was talking with one of the escorts, and she said, Shawn Carney came to my house yesterday. And I said, why? What? Why? And she said, they're doing some kind of prayer thing. This was before 40 Days ever happened. This was just kind of when it was an idea to them. And she said that they're doing some kind of prayer thing outside of our clinic. And I said, oh, really? And she said, yeah, he gave me a flyer. And I said, well, what did it say? And she said, it just said, pray to end abortion. And he asked me if I would pray to end abortion. And I said, well, what did you say? And she said, well, I just said, okay. And because it was a new concept at that time. We had had people outside of the clinic for years since it opened in 1998, but there had not been this peaceful prayer movement outside of the clinic. It was a very aggressive scene outside of the clinic. Probably one of the reasons that I continued to volunteer with Planned Parenthood. I first volunteered with them in 2001. And I remember not really knowing how I felt about abortion, not really knowing how I felt about volunteering at an abortion facility. But I drove up that day and I saw people outside with really large graphic signs, and I saw them outside with signs saying, you know, you're a murderer, and I heard them yelling at the women and calling them names as they walked in. And it was at that moment where I thought, if this is what it means to be a Christian pro-lifer, then I don't want any part of that. And it was at that moment where I became very protective of the women going into the clinic. And I often wonder if it would have been different for me if I would have gone to volunteer the first time and had seen a 40 Days for Life presence outside instead of an angry mob, essentially, outside of the abortion clinic. I wonder if I would have just turned around and said, I don't get it. They're out here peacefully praying. Why do you need us out here? This seems ridiculous. I often wonder if I had an abortion in 2000, and I often wonder if 40 Days for Life had been outside of the building where I had my first abortion, would my life have been different? Would I have made a different choice? But instead I walked in alone with absolutely no opposition. And so we never know how our lives could be different based on the actions of others around us. And that's really our responsibility, isn't it? That's one of our responsibilities, is to be our brother's keeper and to share Christ everywhere we go. And sometimes it's with our words, and sometimes it's with our actions. And many times with 40 Days for Life, it is solely with our actions and our prayers and just showing up outside of these places where abortions are taking place. I began working, I began with Planned Parenthood in 2001. As much as I would like to tell you that I had a lot of internal turmoil or this inner angst about what I was doing, I didn't. I enjoyed my job. I enjoyed what I did. I believed that I was there to help women. I didn't get involved with Planned Parenthood because I was this bloodthirsty person who just loved abortion. That was never it for me. I believed that at Planned Parenthood we were trying to reduce the number of abortions. That's what they say. You'll never see a Planned Parenthood commercial or a Marie Stopes commercial that says, "We are really excited about all the abortions we provided last year." That's not how they come off, right? They come off as a charitable and a giving organization, almost like a benefactor to the masses, and providing all of this health care for women. And so I believe that we were there to provide safe alternatives for women, and that we were there to reduce the abortion rate. And that's what I believed for years. And it wasn't until I had a budget meeting with my supervisor in 2009 where I was looking at my budget from the previous year and then the upcoming fiscal year. And inside of every abortion clinic, there is a quota for the amount of abortions that this facility must sell. Abortion is a product that the industry is selling. And there was a quota there, and I knew the quota existed, but we had never had a hard time meeting that quota, so it had really never come up. It was never in the back of my mind. But this year I'm looking at these pieces of paper, and I noticed that our abortion quota for the upcoming fiscal year had doubled. And I was confused. Their goal is to sell abortion to the masses and to normalize abortion. Really is their primary goal, is to normalize it so that when women are seeking abortion services, it feels like something normal to do. It feels like it is not morally objectionable. And it was funny, I don't know if anybody heard me on BBC Women's Hour yesterday, but the woman that was on it was interesting. It was interesting, the things that she said, and I was laughing to myself when she was talking, because this one particular thing that she said was, she was talking about how abortion is an unselfish decision for women. They asked me why I had 2 abortions, and I said, well, it was 2 selfish decisions that I made, 2 mistakes. And she was talking about how abortion, this woman Lisa was talking about how abortion is unselfish, and how it is a decision that women make unselfishly to better themselves, to better their current families, and to better their future families. And I was laughing to myself when she said that, because I helped develop that talking point at Planned Parenthood. And I used to say that often. And that's really all it is. It's rhetoric. It's propaganda on their side. It is a talking point. everything that they say is a talking point because it's not something that you can really believe in your heart. So it's something that they can only believe in their head. No one can believe in their heart that killing a vulnerable, defenseless person would be the right thing to do. So they believe it in their head, and they try to convince their heart, but their heart won't allow it. And that's why all the talking, when I talk about abortion, it's from the heart for me, because it's real, and it's something that I believe. It's not just up here, but it's in here. But it's the opposite for those that support abortion. But it was interesting to me because she knew all of the Planned Parenthood talking points. And I just found it interesting to see how even Planned Parenthood's culture that's so pervasive in the United States has even seeped over here into the culture of the United Kingdom. And I walked away from that budget meeting with my supervisor feeling confused, but after 8 years of justifying my sin, my participation in abortion, I somehow justified that meeting, and I walked away. And about a month later, we had a visiting physician come into town, and he was going to do an ultrasound-guided abortion procedure. And that's not something that's common inside of abortion clinics. Most abortions are done in a blind fashion. So they have a suction tube that is inserted into the woman's womb, and the physician will blindly probe around in the woman's uterus until they think they have enough blood and tissue in a jar. And that was the way that I knew abortion to take place. It was the only way that I had ever seen abortion take place. And so when I was asked to assist in this, I thought for sure that it would be a wonderful learning opportunity for me to see a different type of abortion procedure. And so, as Shawn said, during the abortion procedure, I was holding the ultrasound probe in place, and I watched as this 13-week-old little boy was fighting and struggling for his life during the abortion procedure. And he was flailing his arms and legs, and it was apparent that he was trying to move away from the probe, but there was nowhere for him to go. And after the procedure was over, I can't say that I walked out of the room feeling sad or feeling a sort of devastation. I walked out feeling shocked. I walked out feeling very numb. I was shocked because Planned Parenthood had told me, and I had then in turn told thousands of women, that the fetus had no sensory development or did not feel anything until 28 weeks. And so as I'm watching this 13-week-old child fight and struggle for his life, that was shocking to me. And I walked out feeling betrayed, and I walked out knowing that I had betrayed thousands of women because I had spoken a lie. They had asked me a question, and I had given them a lie in response. And I hate liars. And I realized that I was probably the biggest one that I knew. And it took about a week. I didn't want to leave my job. I made great money at Planned Parenthood, and it would be a lie to say that I was just really excited about leaving that part of my life behind me. I wasn't. I didn't know what that would look like. I knew that I would be leaving all of my friends. I knew that I would be leaving a very generous and stable income. I knew that I would be leaving different, various perks, retirement, and all of these things behind. And I didn't know what that would look like, but And so I didn't want to. I tried to make it okay in my head. I tried to make what I saw on the screen okay, but in the end, I just couldn't. And so about a week later on a Monday, I was sitting in my office, and it was during 40 Days for Life, and there were these two women that always took this shift in the morning, and I knew them and recognized them. And I guess for the first time, I was really praying. I was trying to connect with God in a way that I had not actively been trying to connect in the past. I put on the front. I went to church every Sunday and I pretended like I was a follower of Christ, and because that made everybody feel better that there were Christians working in the abortion industry, and it made our point more effective. You can be a Christian and be directing an abortion clinic. But I guess for the first time I really tried to connect with God, and I was praying, and I felt like I was just asking him, like, I need someone to talk to. I need somewhere to go. My husband, who's here with me, he was always pro-life, so we didn't really talk about my work. That was a source of tension in our marriage, and my parents were on vacation, and my mom is terrible in crisis. So I'm not calling her. And so I thought, I'm not going to call my parents. So who am I going to talk to? All of my friends worked in the abortion industry. And I'm looking at my window, and I feel like God is telling me to go to these people that were outside with 40 Days for Life. And I thought, no, give me somebody else. Anybody. I do not want to go to these people. And I didn't know, at that moment, I didn't know if I had the guts to do it. I didn't know if I had the courage to walk over there and say, you've been right and I've been wrong all these years. I didn't know if I had that type of humility to admit that I had been wrong for all these years, but I ended up, I said, okay, all right, I'll do it. And so I got in my car and I drove, I don't know, probably the 50 yards down the street, because their office was conveniently located next to our abortion clinic. And I drove into their parking lot, and I called the office. I didn't just want to walk in, because that would be strange. And so I wanted to call, so I called, and this woman named Heather picked up the phone, and I said, hi, this is Abby Johnson at Planned Parenthood. She knew who I was, obviously. And I said, I'm in your parking lot, and I would really like to come in the back door and talk to you guys. And I said, would that be possible? And she said, can you hold, please? and so I said yes, and so about 30 seconds later, she picked up the phone and she said, okay, we're going to open the back door. So they opened the back door, and they're all three standing there like a statue looking at me like this. And looking quite fearful. And I finally was like, can I come in? And so I went in, and that was it, and I didn't know how they were going to react. I started talking about my story and talking about what I had seen and saying that I wanted to leave, and I didn't know how they were going to respond. I didn't know if they were going to look at me and say, well, that's great, but you've been really rude to us the past 8 years, and so you owe us a big old apology. Or I didn't know if they were going to say, it's too late. You've been doing this for 8 years, and we're not interested in helping you. I didn't know what they were going to say, and honestly, they could have legitimately said either. And those answers would have been justified. But I walked out of there feeling like I had just experienced the closest thing that I will ever experience to Christ's forgiveness in human form. and that it was over. That was it. And after my story went public, thanks to Planned Parenthood, one of the gals that was there, Karen, was interviewed by a reporter, and he was trying to get the dirt on Abby Johnson, right? We want to know what she was really like before she became pro-life. And so he was asking her all these questions and wanting to get all this information, and she finally just looked at him and she said, I can't answer that question for you because I don't know who that person is anymore. She's a new creation in Christ. And that was literally how it was after I left the industry. And you know, I certainly didn't expect this for my life. I didn't expect to be speaking publicly and doing this type of work. I didn't expect to be a public pro-life figure, for sure. That's not what I would have wanted for my life initially. And I didn't know what I wanted to do. I felt like when I left the clinic that God had kind of rolled out this plan, but I wasn't sure what the plan really looked like. And I knew that I was going to be doing speaking and things like that, but I didn't know what else it would involve. And I was approached by, or my agent was approached by a publisher and said, would Abby ever consider writing her story and writing a book? And I hate writing, so I said, no, absolutely not, never, it's never going to happen. And then a few months later, they were approached again, and so my agent came, look, we have a different publisher, would you consider writing? Nope, never. And then about 8 months later, I had written a book. And so we got the book published, and really, I only wrote it for one reason, and that was, when I worked in the industry, I kept thinking, while I was working in the industry, if someone like me had come out, right, and had defected from the organization, and they had been a clinic director, would I pick up their book and read it? And I thought, yes, I would. I know I would. I would pick it up and read it as a critic to say how wrong they were, but I knew I would pick it up and read it. And so I thought, if I write this book and just one abortion clinic worker picks up the book, reads it, finds some truth in it, and leaves their job, then that would be worth me taking the time to write this book. And I didn't know if it would happen, but that was my whole intention for writing it. And my book came out, unplanned, came out January of 2011. And within about 6 months, I had been contacted by 17 abortion clinic workers who had read the book or heard of my story because of the book, and had left. And so I was trying to help them on my own, and my husband and I were helping them financially on our own. But when it got up to 17, I thought, okay, I think I actually need to do something with this. And I didn't know how to start an organization, but I knew that something was needed, and I was looking around trying to find an organization for abortion clinic workers, but there was none that was specifically for them. And so I started this organization called And Then There Were None, and we ended up having, we thought that if we had 12 workers come to us in a year, that we would consider ourselves very blessed, because we thought it would be a hard sell to the abortion clinic workers. But in 17 months, we've had 91 workers come to us. And that's been surprising, but it's also been affirmation to us that this was not my idea, but this was something that truly was God-breathed and something that needed to happen inside of the pro-life movement. And My ministry provides emotional support and financial support during their transition out of the industry, and legal support. There are many times a lot of legal issues that follow clinic workers around after they leave, and spiritual support. And we've just been very blessed to see the fruits of our labor and feel like this was really a missing piece of the pro-life puzzle in the United States. And I'm just honored to be doing it and doing this work. So if you guys have any questions, we'd be happy to answer them for you.
So we have time for a few questions, and then Abby and Shawn will be signing books, and we'll have tea and coffee.
Can I ask a question? My name is Elizabeth Smart. This is the Catholic Herald, which is our national Catholic newspaper here. And on the front page, there's a report about one of our prominent politicians, Anne Whittaker, who was a former MP, and very much pro-life campaigner. And from what you've said, Christ and religion play a great part in your life, and your very inspiring story, for which thank you very much. But she says here, pro-life lobby will fail unless it uses religious image. She feels that we do not relate sufficiently to the secular world and the way that they perceive things without any sort of informed religious conscience. And I wonder what you feel about this.
Yeah, I agree with her.
Do you?
I do. I think that we have to be more concerned about our perception to the outside, pro-choice movement or apathetic, population that's out there. Of course, for both of our ministries, prayer is foundational, and our belief in Christ and our relationship with Christ is foundational, and very important. But when I can tell you that when a clinic worker comes to our website, abortionworker.com, they will not really find much mention of God, because I think that people who are lost, people who are pro-choice, people who are apathetic, are generally turned off by someone who appears to be this religious zealot. And that's the way the pro-life movement is perceived, is that we are religious, crazy people who are only interested in taking away people's rights. And I think we have the arguments available to us, but I believe that we are currently losing the argument. Because if someone comes to me and says, why are you pro-life? And I say, because the Catholic Church says I should be pro-life, then I lose that argument. If someone comes to me and says, why are you pro-life? And I say, well, because the Bible says so, I lose that argument. And so I think we as individuals need to do a better job of figuring out our own internal dialogue. Why are we pro-life? Is it just because our religion tells us we should be? Is it just because the Bible speaks about the sanctity? I mean, what is it? Because that's not why I'm pro-life. If I wasn't religious and I had that experience inside the clinic, I would still be pro-life. I'm pro-life because science tells me that it's an unborn human being. Because logic tells me that it's an unborn human being worth protecting. And so when I have a discussion with someone, I will never bring up religion into a debate. They will. If I debate with an atheist, they will always bring up religion. And then that's great, because I can say, hold on now, why are we talking about religion? I'm not talking about religion, I'm talking about science, So I think there's a group in the United States called Atheists for Life. And they're a fantastic group with fantastic resources available. Secular Pro-Life is another good organization. Pro-Life Pagans is a, I know. Yeah, there was one there last night. Playgal, which is a pro-life alliance for gay and lesbians. All of these groups are not religiously based, but they could argue the pro-life point better than most Christians I know. And so I think that we have a lot to learn from them, and I consider them great allies in the pro-life movement. And the problem with the Atheists for Life group, and I was telling their president this one day, I said, the problem, I said, I love you guys, the problem is that you all keep becoming Christian. And your group is fading away. But I think, but that makes sense, right? Because we know that life and faith are something that eventually will intersect, and that there could possibly be a heart change on it. So, but I mean, for me personally, I believe that we will continue to lose as long as we don't have some better arguments in our bag, and as long as we can't separate our faith from why we are pro-life. I think we will continue to be seen as lunatics and as religious lunatics. And so I think that I agree with her wholeheartedly.
What would you suggest we do when we stand outside abortion clinics? Should we stop praying? Because that is actually what riles a lot of people. We're getting more and more abuse when we do this. And they actually say, we hate you praying, we hate you shoving your religion down our throats kind of approach to us. I have found, I agree with you actually, that when you say something like, for example, in England, we have an ageing population and not enough young people. Why? We've killed 7 million of them. I mean, that actually hits home. People think, oh, 7 million, so a lot of people don't know that statistic. Yeah. And rights for fathers.
Yeah.
The woman who has the right.
Yeah, and I mean, I can tell you that I'm a fan of the rosary, but I don't pray the rosary when I go out to the clinic. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm not at all saying it. I'm just saying for me personally, when I go out to the clinic, I may be reading a book of prayers. I may just be praying on my own. I want to appear as a secular person when I'm out there. There are different schools of thought on that, and I don't think any of them are wrong. But for me personally, when I go out to the clinic, I want to be approachable, and it doesn't matter. They're going to think you're a religious nut anyway, if you're out there. But I want to do everything that I can to lessen that. Although I also want to say that there's something very powerful for most people when they see clergy outside. We would have sisters and priests come out to our clinic, and we had a sister that would come out frequently, and the women would call us and say, when is the nun going to leave? Because they did not want to come in when the sister was out there or when priests were out there. Because religious they're like the outward sign of our inward conscience. And so there's something very powerful about people being out there in their clerics. And but if I'm praying outside, if I'm not the sidewalk counselor on duty, then I don't mind praying the rosary with someone. But if I'm the sidewalk counselor, if I'm the person that is going to be trying to approach people, I'm not going to try to wave them down with my rosary flinging around in the air. But there's different schools of thought on that, and I think you just have to do whatever you're comfortable with and whatever you feel called to do.
Yeah, and particularly in the area of lobbying, we always use secular arguments.
Yes.
With the Congress. That's the most effective way. 40 Days for Life are obviously prayer vigils, and a prayer vigil without prayer is very lame. And I think it's that approach. The prayer does make it approachable. If it's waving Bibles and rosaries in people's faces, telling them that they're going to hell, then it's completely unproductive. But we've had many women tell us that they chose life for their baby because there were people out there praying, and that there are places where that element is our only hope, and it's usually where the last hope is, and that's the places where the abortions actually take place. We can present all of our arguments. The other side has to reject the two institutions that built Western civilization. They have to reject religion and they have to reject science. And they have no problem rejecting one, but they have a real struggle in this issue to reject science, but they have to justify their point. But at the end of even that argument, their will is what they're serving. And so the science will prove the humanity of the baby, but that's when we reach the darkest point of this issue, which is that we don't care. We just don't want the child. And that's the darkness that needs the light, and that transcends into the need for prayer and for fasting. Cardinal Newman said that prayer and fasting is often called the wings of our soul, and that if we do not pray and do not fast, we will never follow Christ. When I first read that quote, I was drinking beer and eating peanuts. So I clearly realized I have a long way to go. But that requires humility. And like Abby said, you have experienced a lot of persecution if you've participated in a 40 Days for Life campaign in the UK. And we've seen that in the most secular parts of America, the campaigns are at their best. Just as we've seen 40 Days for Life spread rapidly in the UK. Where our most secular cities, New York, San Francisco, that's where the campaigns have the largest impact, and we are guaranteed that persecution, and there's nothing that we could say to stop that or pretend that it wasn't fair.
Absolutely staggering that in Cheltenham, upper middle class, the book club, I proposed your book, and they came to my house. They knew I was a Catholic lady, and this aggressive woman just said straight out, she said, well, Bernice, if we're going to choose books like this, the club will fold. I said, it's just a story. Oh, but I said, it's just somebody's autobiography. Oh no, but that should be about heroes and heroines. And they were amazing, absolutely gorgeous, terrifying.
I think that we see aggression on the pro-choice side, which makes sense because they're advocating for violence against the most vulnerable. And I think that if you are going to advocate that type of violence, then I would think that you would have to have some sort of aggression in your own heart and in your own soul. And I don't know if you guys saw what happened in Argentina a few days ago. There were a group of women who, there was a group of men who were protecting their cathedral, Catholic men who were protecting their cathedral from vandalism, and there was a mob of very angry pro-choice women that showed up, and they were spitting in these men's faces, and they were spray painting their face and their bodies, and the women were topless, and it was a very violent and evil. They burned an effigy of Pope Francis in the public square. It was a very evil scene to watch. It was a very violent scene, and I think that reflects the violence in their own belief system. When you are okay, when you feel confident about promoting violence against our most vulnerable, then I believe that reflects in every part of their life.
Yes.
Would you say a bit more about graphic imagery and the ineffectiveness of it as a strategy? Because I know that it's something your book touches on, and it's something that's always debated.
I don't believe in graphic imagery outside of abortion clinics. I'm very firm on that. And that's because of my own experience. So there are people that have been in the pro-life movement for longer than I've been born, and they are very firm on their belief that graphic imagery is the only way to change people's minds. But I have a very different perspective than they do, and I have 91 other men and women who have worked in the abortion industry that have a very different perspective, that all say that graphic imagery is devastating to what the pro-life movement is trying to do. Are there appropriate places for it? Absolutely. On university campuses, educational settings, I believe that if done properly, that it can be very effective, and we've seen it be effective. But outside of abortion clinics, it does a couple of things that are damaging to our movement. It creates a camaraderie with the abortion clinic worker and the woman seeking an abortion. The abortion clinic becomes the safe haven. The abortion clinic becomes the refuge. These women, I've literally seen women run into abortion clinics as if they're running to a savior, because they see this graphic imagery as something that's very aggressive. And by the way, they've already been warned about all of you crazy people when they go to the clinic. So when they make their abortion appointment, the abortion workers are told to let them know that there will be crazy protesters outside of the clinic and they're just trying to take away your rights, and so just ignore them and keep your windows rolled up and run into the clinic and pretend that they're not there. So they've already been warned. They already have a fear of you that go out to the clinics to pray peacefully. It's an irrational fear, but it's one that's perpetuated by the abortion industry. And so when they drive up and they see what looks like a circus with all these graphic images and people screaming at them outside, then it only confirms the stereotype that they've been told. And so what happens is a woman may see a graphic image and run into the clinic and ask the worker, is that really what it looks like? And the abortion worker is going to say, no, of course not. You're just nuts out there. And so it continues to build camaraderie inside the facility. We don't ever want women to see an abortion clinic as a safe haven. And I believe, from my perspective of watching this for 12 years now, that they are incredibly detrimental. Now, am I saying that babies have never been saved by graphic? No, that's not what I'm saying. Of course, there have been babies that have been saved, but we don't know how many have been turned away and have been just completely turned off by our message because of what we've done. So that's my answer. Yes, ma'am.
I just like to think of the woman who runs into that clinic. This is being a devil's advocate, who's in a real panic of carrying this child. What is then being done when you are praying and when you are able to convince to keep the child? Because the reason why she goes there is she's in fear. Gosh, I'm suddenly carrying a baby and I haven't got the means and I haven't got the back of the home and I'm poor and how am I going to keep this? That's very probably often the reason why these people go there. It's like another contraception. In London there is there a backup, because all these people need love. They need to be surrounded by, support.
Yeah, so our job is pointless if we don't have anywhere to send women, right? And I often tell people, those of us that go out to the clinics to pray, we're basically like ambulance drivers, right? We're at the scene of the crisis and we're there to pick up the pieces and the brokenness. But then if we don't have somewhere to send the ambulance to, then it's, why are we even out there, right? I don't know what it's like here in this part of the country. But I do know from yesterday, some meetings that we had yesterday, that there are pregnancy help centers, pregnancy resource centers. There are many of them in London, and so is that here? Are there some? Yeah, so there are some here too. So when we go out to the clinics, I don't know if you guys bring literature out to the clinics when you go and pray, but if you don't, you should. You should have on hand always places to send these women. So, if we wouldn't have 8,200 saves if we just looked at them and said, don't have an abortion, but I don't know where to send you, right? They would walk into the clinic. So, but because we're able to say, don't have an abortion, and here are safe places that you can go instead of this abortion clinic, they leave and they choose life. So I think that we have to be very proactive with the information that we have on us and the relationships that we develop with these centers in our areas.
We have time for perhaps one more question, and then Abby and Shawn will be signing books, and we have t-shirts for sale and coffee and tea in the back. Yes, ma'am.
I was just wondering if either of you have any thoughts on the opposition that uses the overpopulation argument, and like if we don't allow abortion, oh my goodness, the world is going to be totally overpopulated, we're not going to have enough resources, and then those children who've been born are going to have terrible lives. Like, what would you say to that argument?
I'll start.
Do you have anything to say?
Yeah, well, we are overpopulated, and so we should probably start with the kindergartners. Dr. Stephen Mosher is probably the best resource. If you're not familiar with him, he has done so much work on the overpopulation myths and how we're, in fact, particularly in the West, underpopulated. And now our countries are dependent upon immigration. We are not replacing ourselves. It takes 2.1 children to replace yourself, and in the United States it's 2.1, but that's a skewed statistic because of immigration from Mexico particularly. And so it's a complete myth, and it was used in the 60s and 70s in the United States to really get abortion legalized in 1973. And so Dr. Stephen Mosher is probably the best authority. He's a PhD. He's frequently in our national media, which is great. Many professors will have nothing to do with him, so he's sort of been ostracized by academics. But he has some great resources and articles online that I encourage everyone to get, because that is an argument. It doesn't come out as often as it used to in America. It's not as big in the United States, but that may be different over here. But rarely do we get that argument as a reason for an abortion because of its the eugenic roots of where it comes from. That there are too many of us, therefore it also grants humanity to the baby. So it's kind of a backdoor argument, because if we're overpopulated, then a pregnant woman represents the problem. And no one really wants to take that argument. It sounds very cold, and it is.
Could you spell his name, please?
Mosher.
Yeah, and there's some really good videos online too, done by a group. If you just type in overpopulation as a myth on YouTube, there are some fantastic videos that, we need to have arguments, and Dr. Mosher is fantastic, and he has research-based articles that you can look at. Because, you can have an opinion, but if you actually have research to back it up, that's better.
Yeah.
And he has all the research to back up his opinions and what he's found. And so I think that we have to educate ourselves. But yeah, is that a common argument here? Or, yeah. Yeah, every once in a while we'll hear it. In the United States, there's been studies showing that the entire population of the United States could fit in Texas and own a 3-bedroom home. And so it's
5 cows.
And 5 cows. And so it's been so heavily refuted in the United States that people don't really use that argument anymore, so.
Yeah, I agree. I think another thing that comes up though that would apply to the United States is the quality of life argument. Like, so are we going to save this child but then throw it into an awful life or
Right.
an incredibly bad situation?
Yeah.
Right.
That one seems a lot trickier to me to answer.
There's a great book that was controversial in America called Freakonomics.
Right, yeah.
And it was excellent because the author addresses the abortion issue and shows how if the abortion rate will go up in certain areas, the crime rate will go down. And he wasn't intending to say that should be the case, but he was pointing out the racist factors of abortion and how when we look down on the fact that some people should be here because all of society will benefit, and if others aren't part of our society, then we're all better off. He used it strictly in economic standpoint, but it was a very good point. And I don't even know if he's pro-life, but he had the courage to make the point. And so that's another great resource, is because the quality of life argument, it ends with the destruction of an innocent human being. No matter what society or culture we go into, it ends with that. And we see that in very new and creative ways in our countries through euthanasia, through abortion, through embryonic stem cell research, and it's all done in the name of quality of life for the common good.
And it's kind of a symptom, isn't it? Like, it's kind of it's like when people tell me, like, I'm not for any rape exceptions, okay, in the law. I mean, I'm pro-life for every baby, not just those that were conceived in ideal situations. And so people will tell me, well, why don't you vote for bills, or why don't you promote bills that have rape exceptions? If a building was on fire and you could only save 9 out of the 10 children, wouldn't you do it? That's always the argument I hear. And my answer, my response is always, well, actually, I would work to make sure the fire never started in the first place. And that's kind of what we're doing when we start talking about these arguments. I'm not just trying to treat a symptom in our culture, right? I'm trying to work to actually fix the root of the problem, which is respect for our bodies, respect for sexuality. And so I think that we have to kind of start there. And, you know, we will, and I think the other argument there that in the United States anyway that I'm able to, I don't know about the statistics here, but Roe v. Wade was pushed because people said, if we can legalize abortion, the crime rate will decrease, child abuse rates will decrease, women will feel more empowered, and it will be real freedom for women. But what we've actually seen since 1973, in that 10-year span from 1963, they looked at 1963 to 1973, and then 1973 to 1983. So they were expecting, since the argument was that all these things would decrease, they were expecting that all of the crime and child abuse rates would greatly decrease, right? But what they actually found in that 20-year time period is that the rates of child abuse and crime against humanity, murder, domestic abuse, divorce, I mean, anything you can think of, tripled or more in that 10-year time period. So it did the opposite of what they sold it to do. And that would be interesting to see here, since 1967, what those statistics look like as well. You know, is the child abuse rate down? Probably not. I think, you know, is the criminal crime rate down? Probably not. And I think that child abuse is it's such a silly argument for why we should abort our children. We should abort our children because they may potentially be abused, so it's better that we kill them. It's better to kill somebody so that they won't potentially, maybe, possibly be abused later on down the line. That doesn't make any sense. And so I think that if we can talk about really what's really happening in abortion and continue to talk about the violence abortion is, I think that helps us win our argument.
Thank you again, and let's say thank you again to Abby and Shawn.